I first noticed her before she noticed me. She was leaning against the counter of the cafe, fingers wrapped around a paper cup like it was the only warm thing in the room. The morning light came through the window, soft and uneven, catching the edges of her hair. She wasn't trying to look beautiful, she just was. I was there for coffee I didn't need, pretending to read something on my phone, but really. I was watching the way she stirred her drink even though it was already mixed. When her eyes finally met mine, it wasn't one of those movie moments where everything freezes. It was the opposite. I felt suddenly aware of how much life was happening around me, and how I was standing completely still. She gave me the kind of smile people give strangers, polite, distant, but it lingered just half a second too long. That half second is what kept me from looking away. "Is that seat taken?" I asked, nodding toward the stool beside her. "It is now," she said, without looking up from her cup. Her voice had that low, unhurried quality that made you want to keep asking questions just to hear it again. We talked about nothing at first, the coffee, the weather, the fact that the barista had spelled both our names wrong. She didn't tell me much about herself, but the little she did made me want to know more. Her name was Elena. She was here, for a while. She didn't say how long, and I didn't push. There was something in the way she held herself, like every movement was measured, like she was used to being careful. And still, I caught her looking at me the way people do when they're trying not to. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" I asked. She smiled without turning her head. "Like what?" "Like you're figuring out whether I'm trouble." Her fingers tapped lightly against the cup. "Aren't you?" I wanted to tell her no, but the truth is, I wasn't sure. Not when it came to her. The air between us shifted after that. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, something warm, like sandalwood, and something sweeter I couldn't name. She leaned in slightly when she spoke, and I felt the heat of her arm near mine. "I'm older than you," she said suddenly, as if it was a warning. I noticed. "You don't even know how much older." "Does it matter?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see it, the hesitation, the calculation, and something else, something softer. "It might," she said finally. We fell into a quiet after that, the kind that isn't uncomfortable but feels like standing on the edge of something. I wanted to ask what she meant. I wanted to ask everything. Instead, I said, "I think I'd like to see you again." "That's not a good idea," she said, her tone steady but her fingers curling against the cup. "Why not?" She looked at me then, really looked, like she was memorizing my face just in case. "Because I'm not your forever." I didn't think before I answered. "Then I'll love you like it's mine." Her eyes flickered, surprise, maybe, or fear, and then her phone buzzed on the counter between us. She glanced at the screen, and whatever was on it made her expression change in a way I couldn't read. She slid off the stool. "I have to go." And just like that, she was walking toward the door, leaving me with a coffee I didn't want, a name I couldn't stop thinking about, and the sound of the doorbell still ringing in my head. I didn't see Elena for a week after that first morning. I told myself I wasn't waiting for her, but every time I passed that cafe, my eyes went to the window, scanning for her silhouette. I started timing my coffee runs differently, lingering longer, pretending to check messages while secretly listening for the sound of the door chime. On the 8th day, she walked in. No warning, no smile. Just her, in a gray sweater, hair pulled back loosely, looking like she'd barely slept. She ordered tea instead of coffee, and when she noticed me at the corner table, she hesitated for half a second before walking over. "You always here?" she asked. "Only when I'm not somewhere else," I said. It made her smirk, but she didn't sit until I pushed the chair out for her. We talked more this time. Little things slipped out between sips of tea. She used to live in the city, she moved here, to be closer to quiet, she hated winters but stayed anyway. When I told her I'd grown up here, she laughed softly. "So you're the local expert, then?" "Not really," I said. "Just, someone who never left." She nodded like she understood. And maybe she did, because when I asked about her family, she looked down at her hands instead of answering right away. "I was married," she said finally. "A long time ago." Something about the way she said it told me that, a long time ago, was both true and not true at all. I didn't push, but the thought lodged itself in my head. She'd been someone's wife. She'd probably been someone's everything. And here I was, 21, wondering what it would feel like just to hold her hand. The age gap didn't bother me, not in the way people would think. What bothered me was how easy it was to forget about it when she was looking at me. We kept talking, and I noticed the way her guard slipped sometimes. She'd tilt her head when I made a joke, let herself laugh too much before catching it. I caught myself memorizing those moments like they were rare and might disappear. At one point, she reached for the sugar packet, and our fingers brushed. It wasn't deliberate, but it wasn't nothing, either. She didn't pull back right away, just kept her hand there for a second too long before sliding it away. "Careful," she said quietly. "Of what?" Her eyes met mine. "Of thinking this is simple." She stood then, finishing her tea in one last sip, and I thought she was about to leave again. But instead, she stepped closer to my side of the table. Close enough that I could see the faint line of freckles on her neck, smell that same warm scent from before. Her hand rested lightly on my shoulder, a casual touch that wasn't casual at all. "I'll see you around," she said, and walked away. The warmth of her hand stayed with me long after she was gone. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I wasn't supposed to be at the cafe. I'd come in early to grab a sandwich before class. She was already there, sitting by the window. No tea this time, just her, scrolling on her phone like she was waiting for someone. I almost didn't go over. Something in her posture made her feel untouchable. But she saw me before I could decide. "You're here early," she said. "Lucky timing," I answered, though it felt more like fate than luck. We talked in the low, easy way we'd gotten used to, but there was an edge to it today, like we were both aware of something just under the surface. She kept glancing at the door, and I thought maybe she was meeting someone. Then the door opened, and a man walked in. Older than me, maybe mid-40s. He looked like the kind of man who could walk into any room and own it without saying a word. Her face changed the second she saw him, not fear exactly, but a shift, like she'd pulled a curtain over herself. "Who's that?" I asked. "My ex-husband," she said, without looking at me. Before I could react, he spotted her. His smile was small, polite, but his eyes were sharp. He came over, said her name like it was a test. "Elena." "David," she said, and I couldn't read her tone. He looked at me next. "And you are?" "Just a friend," I said. It felt like both a lie and the truth. The three of us stood there in a strange triangle until David excused himself to grab a drink. As soon as he was out of earshot, she leaned in close. "You should go," she murmured. "Do you want me to?" She hesitated, long enough for me to know the answer wasn't simple. "It's better." I didn't move. Instead, I reached for the notebook on the table, mine, left open, and she caught my hand mid-motion. Her fingers closed around mine, quick and tight, then loosened just enough to linger. It was reckless. David was only a few steps away. My pulse was pounding, but I couldn't pull back. "Elena, don't," she whispered. But her eyes stayed on mine, and I swear she didn't breathe until David's voice broke the moment. "I'll walk you out," he said to her. She stood, and I followed without thinking, but she turned slightly, her hand brushing mine in the narrow space between us, the smallest touch, hidden from him. Then she was gone, walking out with her ex-husband, leaving me at the table with my heart beating too loud and the ghost of her hand still in mine. I didn't hear from her for days after seeing her with David. At first, I told myself she was just busy. By day 4, I knew better. She was avoiding me. I found myself outside the cafe one evening, long after the lunch crowd had gone. She was there, alone at a corner table, a half-empty glass of wine in front of her. "You're hard to find lately," I said as I slid into the seat across from her. Her eyes flicked up, guarded. Maybe I didn't want to be found. The word stung, but I couldn't stop. "Is it because of him?" "Elena," my voice caught, and I hated that she could hear it. "I don't care who he is. I don't care how old you are. She cut me off. "You think this is about age?" She laughed once, sharp. "It's about the fact that I can't afford to need someone. Not you. Not anyone." Something hot and sharp rose in my chest. "So you get to decide for both of us?" Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "Yes. Because I know how this ends." We stared at each other, the kind of silence that crackles with things neither of us would say. Then she broke it. "I saw you the other day," she said quietly. "With that girl outside the bookstore." For a second, I didn't know what she meant, then it hit me. "She's my classmate. We were studying." Her gaze didn't waver. "You were smiling at her the way you smile at me." It wasn't true, not in the way she thought, but hearing it sent a jolt through me. "Is that what this is? You can touch my hand in front of your ex-husband, but I can't laugh with someone my age." The muscle in her jaw tightened. "You don't understand the difference." "Then explain it." She didn't. Instead, she stood abruptly, pacing a small line by the window. The streetlight outside painted her in soft gold, and I could see the battle written all over her, want and restraint tearing at each other. Finally, she turned to me, voice low, steady. "I told you before. I'm not your forever." I stood too, closing the space between us. "Then tell me to stop." She didn't move. Didn't speak. Her breathing had changed, slower, heavier. I was close enough now to see the faint tremor in her hands, the way her lips parted like she might say something, or something else entirely. "Elena," and then, from outside, the sound of footsteps approaching fast, the kind that makes the air in the room tilt. She looked toward the door, eyes wide, and whispered, "Not now." The footsteps outside belonged to David. He stepped into the cafe, scanning the room like he was expecting trouble. His eyes landed on Elena, then on me, still too close to her, still standing like we'd been about to, something. "What's going on here?" His tone was calm, but the way his gaze moved between us felt like a blade. "Nothing," Elena said quickly, taking a small step back. Too small to erase what he'd already seen. David's attention shifted to me. "You're, what? 20? 21? I didn't answer. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Jesus, Elena." Something in me snapped. "You don't get to talk to her like that." "Oh, I don't." He stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "You don't even know, kid. You think she's some mystery you get to solve." David, stop," Elena said sharply. Her voice carried the kind of weight that only comes from history. He shut his mouth, but his eyes told me he still wanted to finish that sentence. He didn't have to. Because a second later, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an envelope, and tossed it onto the table. It was addressed to me. I froze. "What is that?" Something you should read before you decide you're her savior, he said. I found it in her apartment last month. She didn't want you to see it. I looked at Elena. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Don't, she said quietly. Not here. David smirked. Guess I'll leave you two to it. He walked out without another word, the bell above the door rattling in his wake. I stared at the envelope. My name. Her handwriting. My chest was tight. What is this? She sank into a chair, pressing her fingers to her temples. A letter I wrote weeks ago. Before you. Before me what? Her eyes finally met mine. Before I let myself want you. The envelope felt heavier in my hand than it should. Then why not throw it away? Because I thought I'd have to use it someday. Use it for what? To say goodbye without saying it to your face. The words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to tear the letter open right there, but something in her expression stopped me, not fear, but the kind of sadness that made me feel like reading it would be crossing a line we couldn't uncross. So I put it down, slowly, and sat across from her again. You're still here, I said. Her lips curved, not quite a smile. For now. And in that, for now, I heard both a promise and a warning. That letter burned a hole in my mind for days. I didn't open it. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I wanted to give her the chance to tell me herself. When I finally showed up at her apartment, the sky was heavy with rain, the air damp enough to cling to skin. She opened the door in a loose cardigan, hair down, eyes tired like she'd been fighting herself all day. You shouldn't be here, she said. I couldn't stay away, I replied. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I held up the envelope. I didn't read it. Her gaze dropped to it. You should have. I want you to tell me instead. Her breath caught, but she stepped aside to let me in. The place was warm, smelled faintly of tea and something faintly floral. I stood in her living room, dripping water onto the floor, while she wrapped her arms around herself like armor. It says everything I've been trying not to, she began. That I don't trust this. That I don't trust me. That I've been here before, letting someone close enough to ruin me, and I can't, she trailed off, shaking her head. I can't survive that again. I stepped closer. So you wrote this to push me away. I wrote it to protect myself. Elena, my voice cracked. I'm not David. I'm not whoever hurt you before him. I'm me. And I can't promise forever either, but I can promise now. She laughed softly, bitterly. You think that's enough? I didn't answer with words. I just took her hand, warm, tense, trembling, and placed it against my chest. This is what you do to me, I said. Every time you walk into a room. Every time you almost smile. Every time you tell me to stay away but you don't mean it. Her eyes closed, and I felt the smallest squeeze of her fingers. When she opened them again, there was no guard left. Just fear, and want, and the quiet admission that she'd been losing this battle for a while. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. The space between us vanished. I could feel the warmth of her breath, the slight tilt of her chin, one move away from something that would change everything. But she didn't close that last inch. Instead, she pressed her forehead to mine, letting the silence say what neither of us could. When she finally stepped back, her voice was steady. If I let you in, you don't get to leave halfway. I'm not leaving. Her lips curved, faint but real. Then God help us both. We didn't kiss that night. It would have been easy, the rain outside, the heat between us, the way her hand stayed in mine even after her words. But instead, we sat on her couch, saying almost nothing. And somehow, that felt bigger than anything else we could have done. She made tea. I took the mug even though I didn't really want it, just because it was hers. The steam curled between us, softening the air, making the silence less sharp. "Do you regret meeting me?" I asked finally. Her eyes stayed on the tea. "Sometimes I think I should. But you don't." She glanced up, and there it was, that flicker I'd been chasing since the first day. "No. I don't." It was a strange kind of relief. Not the loud, movie kind, but the quiet one that sinks in slow, like warm water. We talked more that night than we had in weeks. She told me about the years after her divorce, about the way loneliness could feel heavier when you weren't supposed to have it anymore. I told her about leaving college classes half finished, about feeling like I'd been standing still while everyone else's life moved forward. Somewhere in all that honesty, the fear started to feel smaller. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. My hand brushed her arm, not by accident, and she didn't move away. "So what now?" I asked. She tilted her head, considering. "Now, we see if we can handle what we've started. And if we can't?" Her mouth curved just enough to make my pulse skip. "Then at least we didn't lie to ourselves." I stepped outside into the cool air, but before I could take another step, she caught my wrist. "I'm not your forever," she said again, softer this time, almost like an apology. I turned back to her. "Maybe not. But tonight, you're mine." Her smile lingered even after she closed the door. Walking home through the wet streets, I realized something: we hadn't solved anything. The age gap was still there. Her ex-husband's shadow was still there. The letter still sat unopened in my jacket pocket. But for the first time, none of that felt like it outweighed the thing between us. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it was ours. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.